the Japanese have intellectual property and techniques to refine to really compete with the Chinese that have like overwhelming dominance, not in the digging up and the mining of the rare earths, but actually of the processing, which is the most difficult and also the dirtiest. They are in partnership with Australia and Western Australia in Perth to open up a new refining plant, which can help mitigate this over-reliance on Chinese refining capability.
Donald Trump and new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi signed an agreement to secure a rare earth supply. Takaichi also vowed to realise a golden age in her country's relations with the US. But what would that look like? Well, let's speak to Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow in Naval Warfare at the Heritage Foundation, which laid out Project 2025, the effective blueprint for Trump's second administration. Brent was also Defence Attaché in Malaysia, covering military issues in the region. Brent, welcome to The Times at One. Let's start with this issue and discussion of a third term. Visitors to the Oval Office are sometimes handed baseball caps bearing the slogan Trump 2028, apparently, despite the 22nd Amendment to the US Constitution, which states no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Do you think the president's prepared to go against the Constitution?
No, I think this is a case of President Trump trolling his political adversaries and getting the better of them. But I think there's a seriousness to and why he chose such a young and very talented upcoming politician in J.D. Vance as his vice president, and also his Secretary of State, who has run before as a candidate even against President Trump, Secretary Rubio. These are very strong Republican candidates. He is working, I think, more on building out the bench as he continues to troll, because he knows even just saying he would enjoy the chance is far different than submitting paperwork and starting a candidacy for a third term. That's a very far different stretch. And I think it's just a case of political trolling on his behalf, which he's known to do.
Yes, he is known to do that. Let's talk about the relationship between the United States and Japan. How would you describe it now? Historically, obviously, very difficult after World War II for obvious reasons. What's that relationship like now?
Well, it's a very vital and strategically important bilateral security and economic relationship, a military alliance. I grew up in Japan. I have family that are Japanese. So it is a very real relationship in many levels. And it does go beyond just the government to government. So what you're seeing now with the president's visit to Japan is just another case of the solidification of the defense elements. The Japanese are very concerned, and they've led the world about concerns over China's increasingly belligerent, as well as massive spending in their defense that goes back decades, the last 2 decades. And Prime Minister Abe, who is a mentor of the current prime minister, was the one that was ahead of many world leaders on realizing this and taking real actions. And so President Trump acknowledges that and has a very strong relationship with Japan as well.
But defense spending has been a point of tension, hasn't it, in the past? I mean, is Japan committed to spending enough in the eyes of the Trump administration?
Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate. I think pressure, the same type of pressure that was applied to NATO members was being applied to the Japanese. And I don't think that was fair for a host of reasons on the historical and also the fact that the Japanese have been very gradually increasing and shifting their military focus to deter a Chinese incursion in the Southwest Islands, the Okinawan Islands. And that actually backfired. The Japanese withdrew from the 2+2 talks. It's a Secretary of State or Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as Minister of Defense and Secretary of Defense meetings was canceled over this kind of pressure. But the Japanese know they need to spend more on defense. They are spending more on defense. The timelines, however, may not be meeting some in the administration's desire for quicker pace of that. But they have been ahead of us, the United States, in realizing this and gradually spending more and more on defense.
Okay, well,
not to say there's enough being done.
Right. Well, I mentioned the rare earths agreement supply. What's in this?
Oh, yes. This is a very good story, actually. The Japanese were the first to bear the Chinese Communist Party's wrath through using of withholding rare earth exports. This goes back to an incident around the Senkaku Islands back in 2010. The Japanese have intellectual property and techniques to refine to really compete with the Chinese that have like overwhelming dominance, not in the digging up and the mining of the rare earths, but actually of the processing, which is the most difficult and also the dirtiest. They are in partnership with Australia and Western Australia in Perth to open up a new refining plant, which can help mitigate this over-reliance on Chinese refining capability. And so this, I think, is part of what was in the background and animates this current agreement between Japan and the United States.
Right, but
how
that
to actually grow this out.
Right, but that may be good for Japan and the United States in terms of relations. But what about American relations with China? Bearing in mind the president is scheduled to meet China's Xi Jinping. What's it going to do to those relationships, particularly in terms of avoiding future trade wars?
Well, I'm not very optimistic. All the indications in Beijing point to China has been, continuing to strengthen their economy and bolster it from outside pressures as they continue to exert a very real and very aggressive military posture across East Asia. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of movements to some grand compromise or a new kind of détente between the U.S. and Beijing, certainly not on trade. We see the Chinese continuing on with the rare earth sanctions. But I think also troubling is the imprisoning of dozens of Chinese Christians just in the lead up to this meeting. And what I hope in a familiar pattern is the Chinese provide, releasing these Chinese Christian hostages as a goodwill gesture to try to get concessions out of President Trump. I hope he doesn't take it. The Chinese Communist Party should release those Christians, should relent on the rare earths as a matter of good practice and freedom of religion, but also free trade.
Right. So you're not holding out much optimism, as you said, then for this meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping.
Yes, the news is going to be the fact that they meet and that they're meeting in a neutral, or not really neutral, but a third party country, an ally of the United States. And so we'll see what comes out of it. It's important on who goes to whose capital first in a matter of Asian face, and also what kind of statements are made or concessions given. But those details will be, it'll be days before we hear that.
What do you think's on the table from Donald Trump? Everyone has to have something to bring in these meetings. You said it's about the meeting itself. But how will that conversation go?
Well, I hope there's an airing of grievances, because I think on the U.S. side, there's a string of them that the Chinese need to act on. There's nothing that the U.S. should be offering as concessions as the aggrieved party, quite frankly. And I'm talking top of the list is the fentanyl precursors, which the Chinese Communist Party have turned a blind eye to, both to their criminal triads, their mafia, as well as the legal exporting of these materials from their chemical manufacturers. They know who they are. They can stop it. They chose not to. And of course, also the economic dumping that we see across the field in things like solar panels and other. I think their non-WTO activities, I think, will also be a bone of contention.
Yes.
And obviously the follow-on is tariffs.
Brent Sadler, thank you very much for talking to us.